Hello, I'm Mariah Rodriguez, and I'm going to be informing you about slavery in America. Slavery in America had many factors that was developed when Africans were being forced into the New World. The slaves were working in an economic system and were working on tobacco plantations. Africans were kidnapped and forced into slavery and separated from families. Most of the slave owners were making their enslaved dependent on them because of restrictive codes. The slaves were prohibited from learning how to read and write. Slaves that tried to escape were punished by the law and had to wear a heavy iron necklace around their necks. And some were even given the death penalty if they tried to escape from their masters. Most of the slaves who had escaped from the south to the north were using the Underground Railroad, and even some slaves were able to escape this way. This was an anti-slavery group that was wanting to limit the spread of slavery, and they believed that it would go away on its own. But they had to start advocating for the complete abolition of slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act had required the federal government and the northern states to capture and return to the runaway slaves. The manifestations that the slaves had exhibited was that eventually slavery was leading up to war, an abolishment movement that was soon to happen, and that there was justification on freeing slaves. Slavery leading up to war. Along with slavery leading up to war, there was a compromise over slavery where they allowed slave states to remain balanced with the admissions of Missouri and Maine as slaves and free states. The slave territory was broken and later compromised. They had thought that this would end their problems, but it didn't. Many other compromises failed because one side was not willing to make sacrifices. And this is a quote from a book. Republican politicians emphasizes an irresponsible conflict between the interests of slaveholders and slave labor on the one side and free white wage laborers on the other. Addressing this quote means that there was a struggle between Africans' founding commitment to Republican governments of slaveholders. One of the main causes of the Civil War was because there was an argument over slavery. The white Union soldiers had believed that Emancipation Proclamation showed that the government finally recognized what they had known, and that the proclamation forced the white Northerners to confront their complicity with slavery. If the war persisted longer than what was expected, the soldiers on both sides confronted demoralization. The white Southerners rejected radicalism and slavery and the social relations. Most of the Southerners were arguing that to end slavery would make the Southern economy devastated. Also, the Southern states wanted to stand up for their state rights over the federal government so they could abolish slavery. The South and the slaves. In addition, the South wanted the slave states to start expanding west, while the North wanted to make western states free. This is a quote. The Civil War was fought over the continuing spread of slavery, with which fugitive slavery had little to do. Fugitive slavery was an irritant to the marginal members of the slave state. Coalition and resistance to federal fugitive slave laws became an important symbol of the North's unwillingness to let slavery continue as an institution. Slavery was becoming a sectional issue in the 1800s, meaning that it was dividing the nation along regional lines. An abolishment movement began to make an effort to end slavery. In addition, the abolishment movement was a controversial political issue that was trying to end slavery in the United States. And the abolition movement began in Great Britain. Lincoln has believed that all black men had the right to improve their condition in society and that they were just as equal to white men. There's this quote that this government could not dare permanently half slave and half free. Lincoln was one of the most important that was involved with the abolishment movement. He would do almost everything that he could to and try to end slavery in America. Lincoln had believed that the nation was giving a bad reputation because of slavery. Lincoln wanted African Americans to leave the United States and settle in Africa or Central America. He had believed that in colonization and that it was the best way to confront the problem of slavery. The abolishment movement began in Pennsylvania during the post-revolutionary period. Thomas Jefferson was one of the first to attempt to abolish the slave trade in American colonies. Southerners morally justified the institution of slavery by religion. And this is part 2. Black activism made a shift to make sure that enslaved were to be ensured that abolition would be a movement not only about but also of black people. Before the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln and a few other leaders decided to abolish slavery to try and stop new territories and states in the American West. After the outbreak of the Civil War, President Lincoln called emancipation for all the American slaves. Some Southerners were opposed to the possibility of freeing slaves. Justification on freeing slaves. Most of them feared from the slaves from being freed was the Southerners that were concerned for economic development and social order. A lot of the military men approved this way and that tried to make good soldiers that they were either them to aspire to this or covet it. A lot of them, they promised the freedom. After the war is won, the slave soldiers would be returned immediately to the fields. And these are my citations.